Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the Florida Food Policy Council's monthly Florida Food Forum, hosted by the Policy Committee of the Council. I am Del Deschamps, the co-chair of the committee. Jennifer Parker is our co-chair, and I believe she is away for this session. With us from the council is the council's administrative assistant, Kendra Love. Kendra will be handling the technical and managerial aspects of our meeting. I'm also asking Kendra to let us know when the session will close and give us an alert when we have 5 minutes left on the program. Kendra, is there anything else that you would like to say at this time from a technical standpoint?
Yes, just so everyone knows, during the presentation, we will put everyone on mute. And then after the presentation, in order to unmute yourselves, all you have to do is just push star and then 6 if you're dialing in. And if you're with us online, there's a little microphone button. You can just push that to unmute yourselves. And also, if you are dialing in and you would like to see the presentation as it's being presented, you just have to log on with the link. That way you can see the visual as well.
Okay, well, that's great, Kendra. Thank you so much. And also in a general sense, thanks to the Florida Food Policy Council for creating the space, the time, and the resources to make this event and our other monthly events possible. For now, this month's topic is a most timely and dynamic one, food politics. And if you are not already familiar with the political dimensions of food systems, today will supply the foundation for knowing and understanding this contested terrain. If you are already informed on food politics and the politics of food, that's great. This session will expand and deepen your understanding. Thanks as always for joining us. A document introducing our presenter for today is posted on the Council's blog site, and if you registered for the event, you have seen the introduction. Today we welcome Anthony Olivieri to leadership of this month's forum. Anthony is a friend and a colleague of mine, and a member of the Board of Directors of the Florida Food Policy Council. We are especially happy to have him with us. Anthony holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning with a focus on food systems. His specializations are geographic assessments of food and health disparities, design of healthy food systems, and public presentations on health equality. And I will note that if you ever have an opportunity to see Anthony present in person, please take that opportunity. It will be well worth your time. You can find much more information about Anthony's background on the Florida Food Policy Council's blog for today's event. Following Anthony's presentation will be an opportunity for questions and discussion. And before going any further, let me invite everyone here today to consider joining the Florida Food Policy Council. These events are great, and the work of the council is extremely important, but it's all driven by membership engagement. So please do consider becoming a member. You will find information about membership on our website. And as we turn over to Anthony now, I ask that he tells us a little bit about himself and what inspired him to take leadership in this important area of our food system and our culture as a whole. And so with pleasure, we welcome Anthony Olivieri. Anthony?
Thank you so much, Del, and thank you, Kendra. I'm sure you both can hear me. And this is a visual presentation, so I will narrate for those who are on the phone some of the items that have the visual impact. But don't worry, we'll make the presentation available online. But I'll do my best to describe some images that have the most impact. My background is in urban planning. I entered urban planning a little later in life, around 2008. And when I got into it, I was into environmental planning, and I was interested in how to make cities more sustainable. Then when I was looking into that, I discovered food. I was actually involved with an organization called Power U. They're a organization based in Overtown, Miami. And at the time, they were fighting for a community benefits agreement with the Life Science Park of the University of Miami. And they asked me, since I was studying urban planning and GIS, which is a computerized mapping system, if I could make a map of diabetes. And when I did that, a light went off for me and also the organization that health disparities, nutritional health disparities in particular, are not random, that food access and food health outcomes are clustered in areas of poverty, areas of racial discrimination. And for me, that changed the course of how I was studying. I no longer wanted to study just environmental planning for environmental planning's sake. I was interested in environmental justice, in particular food justice, in green food infrastructure as justice. And so that's what inspired me over the years to go into a geographic approach to food. So in this presentation, the topic is food politics and the role of policy. And I will go broad about policy, but this could go all over the place. We have a lot of political issues and policy issues in the food system. For example, only this past week, we hear about changes to SNAP that will affect not only recipients of SNAP, but also retailers and farmers and such. And the politics of food would be very, very broad. But for this presentation, I will narrow it down to the areas of policy that we can actually affect on the ground every day, and that we have a right to affect every day, and that's land use policy. So I'll make the argument that even though we do have a globalized corporate food system that could seem quite overwhelming at times, when you look at it from the policy point of view, like where do you start? The argument I'm going to present to you and some tools hopefully you have is that we could actually tackle the global food system politics and policies at the local level using land use policies. So let me start with a little story, and I'll get started here. 1 second, let me advance my slide. I'm going to start a story with food. So in this slide, for those who are on the phone, I have 2 carrots. One carrot is, it wouldn't be called pretty. It's basically gangly. It has many little legs. It's just, a funny looking carrot. If you saw it, you were like, wow, look at this thing, it's very strange. And the carrot next to it is very symmetrical. It's very linear. And the question is, if you had these 2 carrots, and you look at these 2 carrots side by side, it tells a story about policy. So the carrot that is random legs that come off of it is very gangly, is a carrot that was grown in an urban farm of Overtown in 2011. It hit a few rocks along the way, and it caused the carrot to bifurcate and have a very asymmetrical shape. The other carrot comes from a little supermarket not far away, and it's actually from Canada. From the same time of year, one carrot is local, grown by people that actually met and saw, and I saw them when they planted it, and I saw them when they picked it, and I purchased it. And the other carrot is, I didn't see anybody. I bought it in a plastic bag, and they were coming from around the same season, around April or so. So food itself can reflect the policy, and the policy here is a policy of efficiency versus a policy of having control of your own food. So the policy of efficiency is reflected in the symmetrical carrot. This carrot is designed to go through a global corporate food system, designed to be picked efficiently, go through a processing system where it will not gum up the conveyor belt, fit neatly in a bag. And when it's a fit neatly bag, it's supposed to be symmetrical and fit perfectly in a truck or a train, so it doesn't take up too much space. And also, of course, when it's stacked in the supermarket, it's not supposed to roll off, and it's supposed to maximize space in the supermarket. But by maximizing space and maximizing efficiency, this carrot externalizes cost. It externalizes cost to the environment for the very sake of efficiency. It's traveling like 3,500 miles to get to Florida. Meanwhile, the carrot that's very strange looking or asymmetrical has probably the food miles of only like 20 feet. So you could walk, literally people who picked it would walk 20 feet from their apartment building and get it, and they actually could see the farmer. They actually could see the people who are enjoying picking them and growing them. That is a policy for growing food locally, growing food in the neighborhood is a policy where the externalities are community building, knowing where your food comes from, connectivity. However, in the next pictures I'm showing, the city of Miami did not have a policy to allow food growing. The food of the Roots in the City farm was grown on public land, on city land, and it was kind of a, you can do this for now, and they did it for several years, but there was not explicit land use policy saying yes, you can grow the food. Well, the political climate changed, and the new city commissioners and new mayor, they said, you know what, we would like to use this land for other things. We're getting development pressures. Developers want this land, and there's no law saying that you have a right to grow food, or you have any regulations to allow food to be grown or sold. And so the city of Miami told Roots in the City that it must cease its activities of growing food, and it also must cease selling food, because it also sold food. It had a farmer's market. So one picture is its little farmer's market that it would sell and sell food to people. And there was actually a law saying that food shall not be sold in an open air market unless it went through a certain procedure. And they definitely were not doing that procedure. The procedure cost like $250 permit. And of course, they could not afford to do that. So as a form of protest on the last day of the market in April 2011, Roots in the City gave, instead of protesting with signs and such, they gave the food away as a demonstration of, this is the food we produce. We cannot sell it, but we can give it away. And the last picture you can see, there's some youth who came out to protest, and with signs, and the signs say, free produce, food justice for Overtown, free the farmers market, Miami support and allow farmers markets, because there was not, and the word allow farmers markets is very important, because at the time Miami did not allow them. There was, if you looked in the land use codes, there was not a definition of farmers markets. There's something called open air markets, and open air markets cost $250 a day for a permit, but farmers markets were not defined. So there's a saying that Wendell Berry has: how we eat determines to a considerable extent how the world is used. And that's demonstrating the carrots. One carrot you use in the world basically is a huge conveyor belt for a corporate food system, and the local carrot you're using the world to increase social activity, increase local production of food, and all the connections that come with it. But also another saying that I have is the policies that shape the city to a considerable extent determine how we eat, and also determines how we interact with each other as well. And that's the theme for this presentation. Down up north, several years later, in Broward County, there was another experiment with an urban farm with a farmer's market called Patch, the Dania Beach Patch. Some of you may be familiar with Dania Beach Patch. This is something that I was involved with in the early stages when I first started working in this field. And the Dania Beach Patch also had public land, also allowed a urban farm to operate in the public land. But however, before it did that, it made a policy. It got the community together, it got the staff together, and it made a policy saying urban farms, community gardens shall be allowed on public lands. And that opened them up to actually get grants to fund this urban farm. And I was part of this process of them getting money for the grants, but that's another story. But the point here is that the Patch Urban Farm Market Garden that started around 2012 started off with about $30,000 investment of grant money. Since then, there's been another $500,000 of investment from the city and other contributions. There's a robust infrastructure. And so on the far left of the slide, you see a little girl touching a tomato. And this experience of this girl touching a tomato in the city, in a really urbanized city, actually the first city in Broward County, that was made possible by policy. So the urban farm, this physical manifestation of intent to grow food locally, is actually an outcome of a local land use policy. So there's a saying that you can, resist by fighting something, but you also could resist by existing. And here is a good example of resistance by existence, that you can resist the current global corporate food system by simply creating space to exist for the alternative. And here, Patch still exists in 2020. And in these other photos you see from Patch, it's not just growing food, it's also programs for social interaction and experience, placemaking. So there's a photo of children releasing ladybugs in the garden. And of course, ladybugs is a great pest management strategy instead of using pesticides. There's another photo of an old friend of mine, Rochelle, selling green tomatoes. And of course, you think, well, why should you get some green tomatoes? You cannot just sell the tomatoes when they're all ripe because they'll go bad. There's other things you can do with green tomatoes. You can pickle them, of course you can fry them. And so a good strategy is to sell tomatoes at different stages. And that's something you learn by working with local farmers and local urban farmers who have a history of it. Because before the farmers were selling all the tomatoes all at once when they were ripe, and then half of them went bad. And on the far, far right, you could see someone doing a dance painting. So this is programs of art and food growing. So here's an example where if you have a policy to allow food growing, and that policy also says the food growing shall enhance the community cohesion of the neighborhood, of the city, and shall allow for programming for people to experience food in multiple ways. You could get outcomes like this. So these quite robust, beautiful photos, and you can take some of these next week, there's always events, are outcomes of land use policies. So food has a major component of politics to it. And not only that, it has such a politics, a type of politics that awakens people. So here's a quote from Walsh and McRae: "Food, like no other commodity, allows for a political reawakening as it touches our lives in so many ways. Food citizenship suggests both belonging and participating at all levels of relationships, from the intimacy of breastfeeding to discussions at the World Trade Organization." So this tees up the politics of food and policy. Why food is political. Food is political in a very special way because food is intimate. Your first experience with food is probably breastfeeding. And there are policies behind breastfeeding, for example. For example, in Broward County, I was part of an organization that led an effort to make sure that hospitals in Broward County are baby friendly, because it was a policy to immediately give formula to mothers after birth, free formula. And that was a policy actually to inhibit the practice of breastfeeding. And since then, there's been a great effort, and it's worked, that most Broward County hospitals are baby friendly, that the policy now is to initiate breastfeeding and before birth and of course after birth, and to find best practices for breastfeeding. And so these are policies that are brought up at the UN, and they have trickled down to all the way to the local level. But the key is at the local level of your institutions, the local level of your household, the local level of your city government. This is where we can actually enact policy. And so food citizenship is that process. Food citizenship means that you could take food, the intimacy of food, and actually manifest it as a policy where you live. So food also has a power, and I'm sorry to read some of the slides for those who can see, but I'm reading these slides for those who can't see. And so the power of food, as McMichael says, the power of food lies in its material and symbolic functions. So food is material, but it's also symbolic. So the power of food lies in the material and symbolic functions of linking nature, human survival, health, culture, and livelihood as a focus of resistance to the corporate takeover of life itself. So this slide also has a picture of a flyer from D-Town Farms. D-Town Farms is a farm run by the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. And this particular farm is to build self-resiliency for Black farmers in Detroit. And it's also to resist basically the food apartheid that Detroit has been challenged with. And food apartheid is food corporations, supermarkets, and others actively not located in areas that are predominantly Black and predominantly poor, actively avoid those areas because they don't turn a profit. And so a strategy to counter that is, urban farming, CSAs, farmers markets, food cooperatives, and the Detroit Black Communities Food Security Network has developed ways to do that. And one of the ways they do that too is advocating for land use policies to allow them to have urban farms, allow them to have CSAs, allow them to have ways of doing food buyer clubs. And this is a focus of resistance, and it allows them to resist basically not only the corporate takeover of life itself, but it allows them to create their own alternative economies. So what is the corporate takeover of life itself? And here's another slide that shows there are about 10 corporations that basically affect almost 90% of our food. That we understand that corporate consolidation of the food system is a real thing. It's not just the food products like your Cheerios, your oats, or whatever you have getting a package. It's also the genetic parts of food that we see, that genetic consolidation of our food system is quite alarmingly becoming very narrow. And in an era of climate change and instability, having very narrow genetic varietals of food controlled by a very small set of companies is a prescription for disaster. It's a prescription for instability and probably the end of civilization if we don't have great varieties of food. So the question is, how do we basically tackle the corporate takeover of life itself? How do we harness the power of food? How do we do this? And again, I'm going to submit is at the local level. So one example at the local level and resisting the corporate takeover of life itself, it comes from one of our representatives, Representative Rashida Tlaib from Michigan's 13th Congressional District. And is a slide of a picture of her where she's fighting for minimum wage of $15 an hour for those who work in the fast food industry, such as McDonald's. And in the photo, you can see in the upper corner, there's McDonald's. And she ran on this and many other issues. But the fight at the local level of the corporate takeover of life itself in the food system is not just about growing food and selling food and all those other things of the tangible parts of food. It's also the right to make a living in the food system and the right to enact what's called food justice. And food justice, I'm going to read a quote for those who are on the phone. Food justice is communities exercising their right to grow, sell, eat food that is fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, grown locally with care for the well-being of the land, workers, and animal. Again, for the well-being of the land, workers, and animals. So food justice is a strategy, is a response, as a way to harness the power of food. And we see this being done at not only farmers markets, but we also see this being harnessed by our representatives, people who are running for government and who are on TV almost every day now. So the food system politics, if we frame it as a right, is a very powerful way to resist the corporate takeover of our food system. Another strategy, another framework is called food sovereignty. And food sovereignty is basically the right for people to produce, sell, right to control and define their own food systems, the food systems that are culturally appropriate, and a food system that meets aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, consume food. And this is at the heart of policies. And so the question comes up to what anchors food sovereignty, this right to actually shape and define the food system? How do we obtain food sovereignty and food justice in a capitalist run society, which has a general policy of profit and externalized cost? So this is, I'm teeing up this question again, and we'll answer this later on, but I want you to think about this, that we do have the reality of the politics of the food system, that we have a globalized food system that's run by corporate and profit interests, and that's the system that we live in. Do we have to throw over the whole corporate food system? Is that actually realistic and desirable? Or are there other strategies that we can do? And I'm suggesting here that these local strategies of grow and sell and create alternative economies at the local level is one way we could do this, and basically resistance by existence. So before we get into that, I just want to say, go into the basics of what is the food system. And a lot of people here on the phone and coming in probably know what the food system is, but just in case, it's good to know the framework of the food system. So the food system is a network of activities of growing, selling, producing food, of course, eating food. It's a network of those activities, the people who do it, the resources that go into it. It's also the regulations. And that's something we forget. The food system is a network, activities, actors, resources, and regulations and institutions required to produce, process, distribute, dispose food. That's often lost. We often think of the food system, we see a bunch of physical processes, but the food system is also the system of regulations. In other words, a system of policies. And the question comes up, which policies can we actually affect in our everyday lives? And again, I'm submitting that these are the policies at the local level. And so the current food system that we have, the current food system of its regulations, has some pretty awful outcomes. For one, the current food system, its system of regulations and activities, accounts for almost 17% of our commercial output. And it's probably even 20% of our commercial output. And right now, it takes 10 units of energy to produce 1 calorie of food. 10 units. So it takes 10 units. That's a lot. So that's about 400 gallons of oil per American to produce about 3,600 calories. Other ways of growing food that I've shown, the local ways of growing food through agroecology, it only takes 5 units of energy, and those 5 units of energy could produce 100 units of food energy. However, it does take more time, and more people. So a policy where you have a policy of efficiency, the policy that make that very efficient carrot that I showed earlier, that carrot from Canada, that carrot is taking 10 units to make 1 calorie, and involves very few people, involves a lot of machines and a lot of trucks and factories and distribution networks. But if we could change our local food systems to be agricultural, in an agricultural, permaculture way, agroecology techniques, we could use 5 units of energy, but we do have to use more labor. And the trick is, how do we do that in a sustainable way? Some other outputs of the current food system, I'll just name some of these. About 50% of the Earth's surface is used for cultivation. So think about that. Of the surface that we could actually cultivate, 50% of it, of the Earth's surface that we live on, is used for cultivation. However, there's not a unified land policy for that. Land policies for food vary by country, they vary by city, they vary by county. Sometimes there's no policy at all. And how is it possible that 50% of the Earth's surface be occupied and used for growing food, but there's really no unified policy? And in the policies that we do have, how much of it that we can affect? And considering that this activity produces about 20% of our greenhouse gases, and considering that 85% of our fresh water consumption is dedicated to the current food system, how is it that we do not have a policy for it? And the other part too is genetic erosion. We use only about 150 out of the 7,000 edible plant species for food. That counts for about 60% of our calories. 60% of our calories comes from only 150 varieties of plants out of the possible 7,000. And that's a policy. That's a policy to say a policy of efficiency. So we're going to only use this segment of varietals that are efficient and easy to grow for the corporate food system, and the other 6,000 or so we're going to not use because they're not efficient or they're not pretty enough. So we have to look at the current food system and the current regulations and look at its outputs and say, how can we turn these around? And that's the point of this slide, is that 50% of the Earth's surface is being used, and we use only 150 varietals. These are outcomes of the current food system, and we could use these outcomes as metrics to turn them around. What's the alternative to food system that I showed earlier. And for those who weren't able to see, I showed a food system that was linear, growing food, selling food, processing it, distributing it in a linear fashion that ends up with eating food. Another way of conceptualizing the food system is a community food system. And in food system academics, this is well defined. It's defined as a community food system is defined as the integration of sustainable food production, processing, distribution, consumption. These food system processes, they exist to enhance the environmental, economic, and social nutritional health of a particular place. So imagine a policy, if you were able to make one, and say that in my city or in my county, we have a policy that food production, processing, distribution in my locality, its purpose is to enhance the environmental, economic, and social nutritional health of my place. That statement could be a policy. And think of having a broad policy like that, a visionary policy like that, what the consequences could be for your locality. Does your locality actually have a vision for an integrated, sustainable food system that enhances the environmental, economic, and social nutritional health of your place? And it may or may not. And my city is actually making steps for that, and I'll show that a little later on. But this academic vision or academic definition actually could be translated into an actual policy. So how do we do that? Well, we do that through land policy. So they growing, processing, distributing, and getting food, making it, and of course, renewing the food all happens someplace. It happens on land. And land refers to the relationship between people and how the physical world is adapted, modified, or put to use for human purposes. That's what land is. Land is a relationship. A land is a relationship between people and the physical world and how it's modified. And right now we're using 50% of the world of the land to create outputs that are not sustainable. And so the question is, how can we harness land use policy to change that? And the main thing here is that while food is part of, food is part of many systems. It's part of water systems, it's part of transportation systems, and it's part of land use systems and energy systems. And if we understand that food is multi-systemic, that food is part of many, many different systems, we can do that. So some people will say, well, you're always into food. Food is always something that you just talk about. There's other things, there's transportation, there's water, there's access to clinical care. Food connects to all of them. Food connects to all those other policies, it's part of all those systems. And when we assert that and we demonstrate that, I think we can use food to change those other systems. We could use food policy, food land policy to talk about water policy. We could use food policy, talk about transportation policy. So for example, one person told me that transportation is more important than food access. Well, they go together. If you are driving a 2-ton vehicle to get a 1-pound loaf of bread, and you have to take a car to do it, and you can't walk to do it because the way the land is laid out and your transportation system is designed for cars, then you have a policy to basically increase the carbon footprint and food miles for food. So the food system, understand the food system is multi-systemic and it's connected to all those systems, is one of the ways we can activate other areas of land use policy and have food as a pivot point. So what are the land use policy mechanisms or documents that we can use? And in this graphic, for those who can't see by phone, we have at the local level some tools that we as citizens of your locality, by the virtue that you live there, you pay taxes and you're a resident, there's something called comprehensive plans. Comprehensive plans are very broad visionary documents that are supposed to shape how a locality is supposed to be for the next 30 or so years. They're updated every 5 to 10 years. And those comprehensive plans shape something called land development regulations, or otherwise known as land use codes. And those land use codes are things that will tell you where you can have something or cannot have something. For example, some of you might have planted a tree in the swale of your yard, and then the city comes by and says, yo, you can't plant it there because the land use regulation says you have to set it back 5 feet. Similarly, land use regulations can say how you can use the land for urban farming or cannot. In the case of Miami, there's nothing in the land use regulations that said they couldn't have an urban farm, so they got rid of it. In the case of Dania Beach, they changed the land use regulations to allow urban farms. And there are other things such as master plans and community redevelopment agency plans. But in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the first one, comprehensive plans. These are very broad documents that actually have the authority to shape land use regulations and shape other plans. So the comprehensive plan is a statement, basically is a statement of, or a vision, a policy intent about the future growth of the development of a community. Its vision is developed through a wide deliberative process, usually is a huge public input process to develop a comprehensive plan. And it is adopted into law by your local government, whether it's your city government, county government, and both. And it's used by community leaders to guide policies and decisions regarding the community's physical and economic development, which is important. So it's a guiding document for the economic and physical and social future of your community. And it's publicly accessible. If you type in comprehensive plan Duval County, comprehensive plan Orlando, comprehensive plan Fort Lauderdale, you will find it on there. And the comprehensive plan is broken up into what's called elements or chapters. And these are typically a chapter or element on housing, how housing should be laid out, where housing should be, infrastructure, educational facilities, recreational facilities, of course, transportation. And so what I'm going to argue here is that these elements, these chapters of the comprehensive plan, housing, infrastructure, education, recreation, these all could be used as pivot points for food issues. And I'll show what that means in a little bit. So here's an example from Fort Lauderdale. This is their future land use element. It's a slide that shows a newly adopted from the city update to their comprehensive plan. It's now in Tallahassee going through approval, but most likely be approved. And this future land element has a whole objective to enhance community health and food access. Now, we'll just read the objectives. The objective is to create neighborhoods that enhance community health through access to public amenities, healthy food, safe environments for everyone. It's a visionary policy. It's a very simple statement. It basically says the city of Fort Lauderdale is committing itself to create neighborhoods that enhance community health through the access of public amenities, healthy food, and safe environments for everyone. And one of the policies they have here, actually several of them, is how do they do that? It says the city will regularly monitor food level accessibility for residents to identify and reduce healthy food priority areas in the city. It will also utilize data collected by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Centers for Disease Control, and from business licenses to map the locations of grocery stores, supermarkets, farmers markets, and similar establishments to determine accessibility of food for residents. So here's an example in the comprehensive plan of my city, Fort Lauderdale, and I had some role in advising the city of Fort Lauderdale, the privilege of advising the city of Fort Lauderdale through another initiative to get this kind of language in there, where the city's committing itself to monitor the level of food accessibility in its city. And this is one of several policies. And so this comprehensive plan will then shape land use regulations that will implement this. That when it comes time for a supermarket to come into my city, there'll be a regulation to say, you know what, we are lacking supermarkets or we're lacking farmers markets in these areas. And the city will now obligate itself to work with the developer or work with the farmers market to ensure that all areas of my city will have equal access to food. So supermarkets just can't or the farmers market just can't go anywhere. Through the permitting process, there will be now prioritization to make sure that areas that don't have access should have access. And that might be through tax credits and other mechanisms that could do it. It's not defined yet, but the intent is there. The intent is there to create that mechanism where there'd be more accessibility. So here's one example of what a very robust comprehensive plan policy could look like, or a suite of policies could look like at the local level to increase food accessibility and also increase food sovereignty and food justice. So what allows the city of Fort Lauderdale to do this? What allows it to be enforceable by law? What allows the city of Fort Lauderdale and any of your municipalities and counties in Florida to do this is something called the Florida Community Planning Act. This is a land use planning act. It says that all localities have the right to plan. They have a right to plan in the interest of public health. So they must, all localities have, through the comprehensive planning process, is the intent that local government can preserve, promote, and protect and improve public health, general welfare, transportation, and anything that may, and also preempt anything that may be a handicap to that community. So this is a very broad statement. So it basically says that localities have a right to plan to take advantage of things that will improve the health, safety, general welfare of its population. And I think anyone of us could argue that policies that increase healthy food access and food sovereignty and food justice do indeed improve the health, safety, general welfare of a community. So what I'm proposing here, and I think Dell will remember this slide, is that it's a model for food sovereignty activation, a model for food justice activation, a model for basically addressing the corporate takeover of life itself, our model for harnessing the power of food. And that is the first step is to mobilize around land use policy for food policy change. And when we mobilize that, we could create collective participation in the planning process and the land use policy making process. And then we can adopt land use regulations towards greater food sovereignty or greater food justice. And to me, this is a more tangible and realistic approach to addressing the very large spectrum of food politics and food policy, that we could actually go down to our city government, county government collectively and say, you know what, we as residents of this area, we believe we should have food policies address these needs. And so the goal is to get these policies first into comprehensive plans and our master plans and then our land use codes. So in the next like 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to ask for a discussion that we structure it. I have a slide here, in which I will reduce to an interactive slide. I would like to ask your ideas. How would you, some policy ideas or program ideas, how would you create food production, food processing, or anything in the food system, food renewal, eating, with common elements you find in the comprehensive plan? So for example, in schools, how would you increase food production at schools? Or food access acquisition, how would you increase food access acquisition with the transportation system? Or eating and learning about food, how would you increase that, improve that in our housing? Or food renewal, food composting, how would you use buildings and infrastructure to increase food renewal? So I'm going to reduce my slide to that, and let me process this a little bit here. And what I'd like to do is, if I can, I won't be able to get everyone's idea, but I just want to like get some ideas about this, and we could you have fun structuring the conversation. Basically, the conversation is, what are your ideas and how you can use common elements of your community, your open space, your schools, your transportation, your housing, your buildings, infrastructure, to grow, process, distribute, get food, eat, and renew food.
All right, thank you so much, Anthony. This is Kendra. I'm the administrative assistant for the Florida Food Policy Council. So we would like to open up the floor to get some of your ideas about how we can use land use policy. For those of you who have called in on your phones, to unmute yourself so you're able to participate, you just have to push the star and then number 6. *6 on your phones. If you're joining us through the application online, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little microphone. Just click the microphone and that'll unmute you as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, we can
Hello?
hear you.
Oh, hi, my name is Paul Murphy. I just want to make a comment to one of the points on there about schools. In Sarasota, we have a few schools that actually have gardens in them, organic gardens and, small micro farms. And they also feed the students that food through the cafeteria. And I remember when I was in high school, we had home ec. So I thought if you could get all the schools, grade schools, middle schools, high schools, and colleges all of them would have their own home ec and agroecology type of programs that would include, gardening on the premises. Ringling College here, or not Ringling, but New College here in Sarasota also has a huge food forest that you can walk through. It's started by a few students. So using permitting some of the land on the already owned property, maybe instead of having the landscaping there, grass and stuff, they could do a food forest, and then that would be used in the cafeteria or in home ec classes if they don't have that.
Let me unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I unmute myself. Great. That's wonderful. So what locality was it, or is it?
We're in Sarasota.
Oh, Sarasota, great. And Sarasota is one of the first counties actually to first localities to actually have comprehensive plan amendments to allow food growing, and that's excellent. So what I'm hearing from you, for example, I just filled out a couple ideas here in this chart under food growing, micro farms for growing food, and food forest as a landscape policy under the schools. So
nice.
So for example, it may happen at that particular school, but I'm not sure. Did you say it happens at the comprehensive plan level, or if you're not, or is it just a school policy or within the school system?
I'm not aware of it being the comprehensive plan. That's news to me, but I am aware of the
of a school policy.
Yes.
Yeah. So one question is, you have existing policy, at least existing activity happen at the school level, and one example, this could be used as an example to say, if it's not in the comprehensive plan most likely has a school element. And what if in the school element it says that schools shall implement, where feasible, a food forest landscape policy, a food forest landscape policy. And this policy is to improve the health and well-being of students. And of course, microfarm growing could be a policy. So it could be this under the production level of grown food, and the comprehensive plan is under the school element. And you have, and often what happens is that institutions take on activities such as this, and they become good examples. And the next level is like, okay, it's a good example, but is there a policy to perpetuate it for the next 30 years across all the localities? And so that one approach would be, it's like, look in your comprehensive plan, see if it exists. If it doesn't, you could actually, get parents together, teachers together, and some students together, and work with your local government, whether it's the county or the city, and say, we have a wonderful example of the benefits of this. Could we make this a policy so it becomes institutionalized for generations to come?
Yes.
So that's a great example.
Even statewide too would be awesome.
It's true, because every policy that a locality passes, it has to go to Tallahassee for approval. So if Tallahassee keeps on getting these policies from localities, and they'll get the signal that municipal and county governments they want food policies for their schools or for their hospitals and other types of elements, and that could trickle up to the state level and get the signal of the governor and other people who are running for office that this is important, and that it becomes a political issue for them.
Yep.
Great, that's a good example. Thank you for that.
Step.
Yeah, great example.
We had a comment from Mara, and
Hi.
she said, is this Mara?
Hi, yes, it is.
Hi. Would you like to share your comment with us?
Yeah, first of all, can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Okay,
I can hear Mara.
Okay.
Solid waste?
Yes, it's something I've been thinking about. You know, I think a lot of us know that food waste is a big issue. About, I think, 40% of food that is produced goes to waste. And one thing I kind of thought about is within the whole food systems process, I guess it would go under food renewal, would be, you know, what can our solid waste departments do to kind of, because right now what I do on a personal level is bring my compost on a weekly basis to our community garden, but I know that there are some municipalities, I think the city of Seattle does this, where there are actual mandated composting stations where you actually have to make sure that your food waste is in one compartmentalized area. And I believe that Pinellas County does that. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There's some sort of program, and I'm not sure if it's a government program or if it's a nonprofit, but if there's some sort of way that that could be institutionalized into our local governments, and maybe our solid waste departments can also create some sort of mechanism that there's curbside compost pickup, that could be, I think, a really great policy to add.
Exactly, that's a great idea. So what I did was, while you made that comment, I amended my comprehensive plan because so comprehensive plans typically have a waste policy, a waste system policy. And what I did was I took housing, buildings, infrastructure, I just combined it into one element. Sometimes they do that. And so you could have here under food renewal, basically, a compost, program for residential, institutional, and of course, and private and commercial. So you could do this, and it could be, the program could be pickup, and it could also be education too.
Oh yeah.
So here's an example where you could look at the comprehensive plan of your locality and look at it. There will be a waste disposal, element. There always is. It has to be. There always has to be. And if the food doesn't exist in there, if there's nothing in there, that's what happened in San Francisco and Seattle, and it's particularly in San Francisco. They turned that into a huge economic boom. They turned the green composting system into soil that now goes to Napa Valley, and goes to local farms and urban farms. And of course, the waste system is that compost soil.
That's awesome.
Goes to urban and rural farms. So that's this right here. I just typed in under production food for waste systems. That is the actual policy that does exist in San Francisco and Seattle, and it's a huge boom. Recycling is typically not really sustainable. Ironically, it's supposed to be sustainable activity, but as you know, recycling of plastics, everything is it's still a cradle to grave approach. But the composting of food is a cradle to cradle operation, and that is I'm glad you brought that up, because in the food system, even though it's linear in this graph, is supposed to be circular. And if we don't have that renewal of food back into soil and energy, then a sustainable food system cannot exist. So that's that's a very important point you brought up.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Kitty Wallace from Tampa. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so my question is about, since you know things about the state of Florida, what might be an example of a community that has a community garden friendly land use plan as it relates to park lands that belong to the Parks Department in the city, lands that are just city-owned lands that aren't going to be able to be developed because they're too small, but they aren't parks, they're just pieces of land that the city owns. I mean, do you have some suggestions of how to find good examples so that we can proceed? We've had these discussions and they're proving fruitful in Tampa, but Tampa has no policy about this.
Yes, Tampa does not. And we did a policy scan. It's not the top of my head, but we did a policy scan. We have 152 policies, and the city of Lauderdale does have a policy and also Lauderdale Lakes does have policies to, actually, if I had it somewhere, I don't pull it up. It takes so much time to pull up, but they do have policies to use unutilized land and allow community gardens on there. However, their permanent process is not really robust. So there's not like a really good to say, yeah, you could do it, but then it comes up to like, how do you permit it? There was not a clear permit path for it. So
I see.
And we could get back to you, but I remember we found a few other localities that had that. We only did six counties that did that. But another way you could look it up, and let's see if I could pull my screen here, is the Healthy Food Policy Project. Let me just pull it on the other screen and I'll show you what it looks like. Healthy Food Policy Project. Let me show you their website here so you could see it. And you could probably see my screen popping up here. And these folks here are actually, we're going to talk with them next week. They have example policies for exactly what you may be looking for. I might not be able to call it up right away. They will have 330 laws. And if you click on that database and you type in community garden, they have ordinances. And you could, you want growing food. Yes, you click growing food, you type in the keyword, get community garden. And
what is the name? Can you say the name a little bit slower? I got the word policy project, but is that?
Oh, sure. You're on the phone, right?
I'm on the phone.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was like showing you some visual. So it's the Healthy Food Policy Project. And when you go to Healthy Food Policy Project, they have a database that's online that allows you to search for model policies for growing food, processing food, and there may be some in the state, there may be some out of the state, but we also ourselves, we created a database of several policies. I know we had policies like that. I know Lauderdale Hill was one, Lauderdale Lakes. But I also remember that there are limitations. They didn't have like, okay, you could do it, but how do you permit it? Is that the next step? So sometimes you can get policies. Also, the city of Atlanta has really, really good examples too.
What was the last city that you mentioned?
The city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta has great policies for community gardens. Atlanta.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Yep. Thanks. You've given me some great ideas. I really appreciate it.
Great. You're welcome.
Hey there. This is Del saying hello. Great job, Anthony. Also, hello to Kate, my colleague from Tampa.
Hey.
We've got just a little bit of time left, and I just wanted to ask one question of my own that I think might be helpful to some that are on the line. Kendra, do we have enough time for one quick question for Anthony to wrap up?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Anthony, it often comes up, and I think you and I have both had this discussion before, but many of us have had this discussion. From a professional standpoint, could you very briefly clarify the distinction between food sovereignty as it's understood and food security as it's used in professional literature and in public policy?
Sure. So what is the difference between being active agency or being passive agency? So in food security, there's nothing that says that you have a right to shape how your food secure. It simply says that you have adequate food for nutritional needs some way, whether it's given to you, whether you get from a food bank or you go to a food bank, or whether you get from supermarket or you have food stamps. But you are still a consumer. Food sovereignty, you're not just a recipient of food security, you are actively shaping how the food gets to you, you're shaping how the food is grown, you're shaped whether you're food secure at all. So it's a matter of agency. So in the food security context, we talk about food security, but the question is, who is responsible for the food security? Is the person who needs the food security? Do they have a way to shape how the food secure in the ways or not? But in the food sovereignty model, the persons or communities that are seeking food security, they are shaping and have self-determination of how their food secure.
That's beautiful. Anthony, I knew you'd be able to summarize in just a few words. I must admit to and observe that your presentation today was outstanding. This is not empty flattery. I've been listening to these presentations on issues of this type for years, and you really articulated it brilliantly with all of the nuances, the concerns, and leading off with the carrot and wrapping up with sovereignty, I think was just spectacular. So I do want to encourage everyone that's on the line or viewing this to tell your friends about this. If you want a clear presentation on the politics of food and specifically how food policy works, tune into this or go online and get this blog, get this webinar. It is outstanding. And I say that on the basis of years of working in this area myself. So, Anthony, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you all for being part of this event. Please tell your friends about the Florida Food Policy Council. Please join if you are not already a member. It does make a big difference to us. And please tune in again next month. We do this on the last Friday of the month. Kendra, is that correct?
Yes, the last Friday of every month.
Okay, so just you can mark your calendars for it, last Friday of every month at 12 noon, and we'll be here and we'll look for you and we'll look for many others to join us next time. So join us at Florida Food Policy Council as a member and also participate in all of our events. Kendra, I'm going to turn it over to you for any last technical observations.
We'll be posting a recording of this presentation on our website, so please come over to our website and check it out. And as Del said, we'd love to have you all join us as members. And thank you, Anthony, and thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone.